They called him Boy in the courtroom, laughed when he walked in, made jokes about his suit being too big, said he looked like he wandered in from a janitor's closet. They had no idea. These three white cops sat there smirking, thinking they'd walk out untouched, protected by their badges, shielded by a system that had always worked in their favor. But what they didn't know was that the boy they were mocking wasn't a clerk. He wasn't an assistant. He wasn't just another black man expected to stay silent in the presence of power. He was the new chief of internal affairs, assigned to oversee their corruption case, and in the next 10 minutes, every smug grin on their faces would disappear because the same system they once controlled was about to turn on them. This isn't just a story about justice. It's about what happens when power changes hands and respect is no longer optional. The courtroom buzzed with the same arrogance it always carried when uniformed officers were on trial, especially white ones. Officers Daniel Cray, Mike Benson, and Leo Hart walked in with smug confidence, their suits freshly pressed, their hair slicked back, their attitudes untouched by fear. They were used to this, to courtrooms where they never faced real consequences, to judges who looked like them, to jurors who understood them, and most of all, to prosecutors who fumbled just enough for them to walk free. Today felt no different. As they slid into their seats at the defendant's table, Cray leaned over to Benson and muttered under his breath, "Looks like our boy's running late." He smirked and nodded toward the empty chair behind the prosecution's desk. Probably got stuck cleaning someone's shoes. Benson snorted, shaking his head. Wouldn't be the first time they let a janitor sit in the front row. The judge hadn't entered yet. The courtroom murmured with hushed voices and rustling papers. Lawyers prepped their notes. Reporters adjusted their cameras. And in the back, the public seating filled with curious onlookers, some hoping for justice, others there to witness another disappointing letdown. Then the door creaked open. He walked in with quiet confidence. No fanfare, no entourage, just purpose. Tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal gray tailored suit. His skin dark as midnight. His presence unmistakable. The officers glanced back, then chuckled. "Who's that?" Hart scoffed. "Security detail?" But then he stepped up to the prosecutor's table and calmly placed a leather folder on the desk. One of the clerks whispered something to the judge's assistant. The assistant's eyes widened and darted toward the three officers. Then she nodded respectfully to the man who had just arrived. That's when the energy shifted. The judge entered moments later and cleared her throat. Court is now in session for the state versus officers, Cray, Benson, and Hart. She looked toward the prosecution table and smiled. Smiled as if acknowledging something unspoken. "We are joined today by Chief Raymond Ellis, Director of Internal Affairs. He'll be leading the state's case personally." The officers froze. Chief? Director? Raymond Ellis? Cray blinked, the color draining from his face. Wait, wait, hold up," Benson whispered. "You've got to be kidding me." But there was no joke in Chief Ellis's expression as he adjusted the microphone in front of him. No anger, no gloating, just calm, controlled authority. "I'm here on behalf of the people," Ellis said, his voice smooth and commanding, "to hold those in uniform accountable when their actions disgrace the badge they wear." Every head in the room turned. Reporters leaned forward. The gallery went silent. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, those three officers understood what it meant to be afraid. They were no longer the hunters. They were now the hunted. And the man they had laughed at just moments ago, he was the one writing their fate. Chief Raymond Ellis stood tall before the court, adjusting his papers with the precision of a man who didn't just know the facts. He owned them. Every word he was about to speak had been carved out of months of investigation, stacks of testimony, hours of reviewing body cam footage, and nights spent listening to victims who thought no one would ever care. "Your Honor," he began. The state presents overwhelming evidence that officers Cray, Benson, and Hart not only violated standard procedure, but actively engaged in racial profiling, unlawful detention, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice. Gas scattered through the courtroom like sparks on dry brush. The officers squirmed in their seats, but none dared meet Chief Ellis's eyes. He tapped the first folder. Exhibit A, body cam footage from May 14th, 2024. Officers pulled over a black teenager, Malik Rowe, claiming a broken tail light. No such damage was found. What was found were bruises, a falsified arrest report, and a planted bag of marijuana. He played the footage. The courtroom watched in silence as Malik was dragged from his car, handcuffed, and shoved against the hood while pleading, "I didn't do anything, man. Please." There was no threat, no resistance, just cruelty. When the video ended, Ellis said nothing. He let the silence hang, let the discomfort settle into the bones of every person in that room. Next came Exhibit B, internal emails recovered from department archives. These emails between Officers Benson and Hartmock community complaints. In one, Officer Benson jokes, and I quote, "Another thug whining to IA. Should have tased him harder." Ellis read it aloud without flinching. He wasn't just presenting facts. He was holding up a mirror. Each new piece of evidence peeled back another layer of corruption. A pattern emerged. Black and brown citizens disproportionately targeted, reports doctored, civilian complaints lost in transit. It was systemic, deliberate, and protected by silence. Cray leaned forward and whispered to his lawyer, panic creeping into his voice. "He's got everything. How did we not see this coming?" His lawyer couldn't answer. No one could. Ellis moved to the witness list. "We will call 5 civilians, all former victims of misconduct by these officers, but we will also call 2 active duty officers from their precinct who have come forward under whistleblower protection." That sent a ripple through the room. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. "The blue wall," Ellis said, turning to the jury, "is the unwritten code of silence among police. But that wall is crumbling, and justice is finally slipping through the cracks." Every eye in the courtroom was on him now, not just because he was black and in power, but because he was using that power with precision, dignity, and undeniable truth. What these officers thought would be another easy walk to freedom had turned into something else entirely, a reckoning. And as Chief Ellis walked back to his seat, he passed Cray and the others without a glance. But the weight of his presence said everything. They were no longer above the law. They were directly beneath its spotlight. And the man holding that light? He was someone they had once ignored, mocked, and dismissed. Now, he was the one calling the shots. The next morning, the courthouse parking lot buzzed with quiet murmurs. Reporters clustered like bees at the gates, and every camera was pointed at one man, Chief Raymond Ellis. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than before. A silence hung thick in the air, like a storm brewing before a downpour. The officers, Cray, Benson, and Hart, sat more rigidly than yesterday. Their confidence had withered overnight. Their once smug expressions were now replaced with twitching jaws and darting eyes. Chief Ellis didn't start with more evidence today. Instead, he opened with a story. 10 years ago, a 12-year-old boy named Jacob was walking home from school. He had just won his spelling bee. He was stopped by a patrol car. One of the officers claimed Jacob matched the description of a robbery suspect, black, hoodie, backpack. Jacob was slammed against a fence and handcuffed. He cried for his mother. "That boy was me." Gasps again rippled through the courtroom. Even the stenographer paused for a heartbeat. "I've carried that humiliation like a stone in my chest, and I swore I'd do something about it." Ellis turned to face the officers directly. "I became a cop. I rose through the ranks, not for revenge, but to ensure that no kid, no person would ever have to live with that kind of trauma again. Not on my watch. Benson muttered under his breath, "This is a damn performance." But Cray didn't reply. His eyes were locked on Ellis, haunted maybe by a recognition that things were spiraling beyond his reach. The prosecution called the first civilian witness, a schoolteacher named Carla Mendez. She recalled how Officer Hart slammed her against her own car while picking up groceries, mistaking her for a suspect they were tracking. "I told them I was a teacher," she said, voice trembling. "They laughed, called me another loud Latina playing innocent. I had bruises for weeks. No charges were filed because there were none." Her testimony cracked something open. The second witness, a war veteran named Mark Daniels, spoke next. He had PTSD from deployment and was beaten after officers thought he was acting suspicious near his own home. Then came the bombshell. Officer Jonathan Reed, a current cop from the same precinct, took the stand under whistleblower protection. "I joined the force to do good," Reed said, "but I watched Cray and Benson joke about beating up kids, planting drugs, falsifying logs. It was a game to them. And if you said something, they made sure you'd regret it." Reed's testimony was like a sledgehammer against the precinct's carefully built wall of silence. Hart slammed his fist under the desk. "He's a damn traitor." The judge banged her gavel. "Control yourself, Officer Hart, or I will hold you in contempt." But the damage was done. The room had seen it. The rage, the arrogance, the lack of remorse. Cray whispered hoarsely, "They're actually going to convict us." Benson shot back, "Shut up. We'll get out. We always do." But this time felt different. The tide was turning, and they could feel it. Ellis, calm as ever, leaned into the microphone. "Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it walks in, quietly, wearing a badge, and it means to stay." The courtroom wasn't just listening anymore. They were believing. As the court reconvened for day 3, the tension inside the room was electric. Word had spread. A crowd had begun to gather outside the courthouse, many holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "We see you, Chief." Inside, the 3 disgraced officers sat in a huddle. Their unity, the smug brotherhood they'd worn like armor, was visibly cracking. Officer Cray looked pale, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Benson's jaw was clenched so tight it seemed fused. Hart, always the loudest of the trio, now refused to make eye contact with anyone. The storm they thought they could ride out was, in fact, the beginning of their drowning. Chief Ellis stepped up once again, but today he wasn't holding a stack of papers or witness names. No exhibits, no charts, just his voice. "You know, there's a funny thing about power," he began. "It can blind you to the truth, make you think you're untouchable, make you think that hurting people is just a part of the job, that no one is ever going to stand up, that no one is watching." He paused, scanning the courtroom, his eyes landing squarely on Cray, then Benson, then Hart. "But people do watch, and eventually they rise." A courtroom officer walked in with a USB drive. The judge allowed it. "This," Ellis continued, "is dash cam footage from a case we were told was lost due to technical failure." The screen behind the judge lit up. The grainy video began to play. The courtroom watched in eerie silence as the footage showed Officers Cray and Hart pulling over a black teenager. No reason was given. The teen was trembling. The audio picked up Hart's voice, laughing as he said, "Let's see if he knows the alphabet backward. That's how we test the real criminals." Then came the thud, the teen being pushed into the side of the car. He screamed. They laughed. The judge's face darkened. Benson stood up abruptly. "Objection! This footage is taken out of context." The judge raised her hand. "Sit down, Officer Benson." Or should I say, Mr. Benson, since you're no longer in uniform. Laughter rippled through the courtroom, but it was laced with rage, the kind of rage that boiled beneath decades of silence and scars. One of the jurors, a middle-aged woman, shook her head slowly, a tear sliding down her cheek. It wasn't just about what happened in the video. It was about every person in that room who saw themselves, their children, their neighbors, in that trembling boy on the screen. Chief Ellis clicked to another clip, body cam footage. This one had Benson grabbing a young woman by the arm after she asked why she was being searched. "You people ask too many questions," he muttered in the clip. The defense attorney didn't even rise to object this time. Hart mumbled, "This is a witch hunt." But Cray, looking like the walls were closing in, finally whispered, "They've got everything. This isn't going away." The once feared officers, the self-proclaimed guardians of the law, now looked like ghosts, haunted by the very truth they tried to bury. Chief Ellis turned off the monitor and faced the room. "This isn't about revenge. This is about repair, about making the badge mean something again." The judge nodded slowly. "We'll break for recess, but let the record show these proceedings are no longer about doubt. They are about damage control." As the court cleared, reporters scrambled outside to report what had just unfolded. Inside, the three men didn't move. Their past had caught up, and justice was just beginning to speak. The courtroom was no longer just a chamber of justice. It had become a reckoning ground, a place where lies dissolved under the light of truth. The crowd that had grown outside the courthouse now swelled into chants. Inside, a different storm was brewing, quiet but undeniable. When the recess ended, the courtroom filled again, but this time, the power had shifted. Chief Ellis, still calm and measured, approached the witness stand one final time. He looked at the judge and then at the jury. "What you've seen," he began, "are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a culture that rewards silence and punishes accountability. But no more." He stepped aside, allowing another person to approach the witness stand. A young black officer, Officer Dana Wells, took the seat. Her uniform was crisp, her posture firm, her voice unwavering. "I was threatened by Officer Benson when I tried to report a wrongful arrest," she stated. "I was told I'd lose my job, that I'd never make detective if I didn't keep my mouth shut." She paused. "I watched young men get humiliated for no reason. I watched women get cursed at, treated like suspects just for speaking up. I stayed quiet longer than I should have, but I'm here now." The courtroom was dead silent, and then came another, Officer James Park, and then another, Officer Leila Rodriguez. One by one, the silence broke. By the time the last officer had spoken, over half a dozen testimonies had painted the picture of a toxic culture, a system maintained by fear and protected by people in power. All three defendants sat in stunned disbelief, their fortress of arrogance now reduced to rubble. When it was time for closing arguments, the prosecution kept it short. "You've heard enough. You've seen enough. This case isn't about tarnishing law enforcement. It's about saving it." The judge looked toward the jury box. "Members of the jury, you are instructed to deliberate and return with a verdict." But the jury foreman stood up before she could finish. "We already have, Your Honor." The judge blinked, surprised. "Very well. What is the verdict?" The foreman's voice rang like a church bell. "On all charges, abuse of power, falsifying reports, unlawful arrest, and obstruction of justice, we find the defendants guilty." There was no cheer, no outburst, just a deep, collective exhale, like the building itself had been holding its breath for years. The judge nodded solemnly. "Sentencing will be scheduled. Officers, excuse me, defendants, you are hereby remanded to custody without bail." Court officers stepped forward and cuffed Benson. Cray, and Hart. As they were led away, Benson turned one last time, his voice bitter. "You think you've won? They'll come for you next." Chief Ellis stood tall, his eyes unflinching. "Number, they already came, and I didn't run." Outside, the crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in powerful applause, not just for a verdict, but for a man who had turned years of discrimination into a defining stand for justice. Media outlets swarmed, microphones shoved forward, cameras flashed. One reporter called out, "Chief Ellis, what does this verdict mean to you?" He turned, offering only 5 simple words. "It means we start from here." And with that, he walked down the courthouse steps, not as a man seeking justice, but as the one who delivered it. A week had passed since the trial, but the impact rippled far beyond the courthouse. The story of Chief Ellis, once dismissed as too black to lead, was now headlining national news. From local newspapers to primetime interviews, his name had become a symbol, not just of justice, but of unwavering courage. Inside the precinct, silence filled the hallways, not the uneasy hush of tension, but the calm of accountability. The toxic energy that once pulsed through the department like a virus had begun to dissipate. Ellis had made his presence felt, not just with policies, but with people. He reinstated Officer Dana Wells with full honors, appointing her as head of the Internal Affairs Task Force. Her first order of business? A full audit of all misconduct reports shelved over the last 5 years. Next came Officer Park and Rodriguez, who were promoted to lead community outreach programs. Together, they began rebuilding trust where it had long been shattered. But Ellis didn't stop there. He held town hall meetings, not in polished rooms, but in barber shops, local churches, basketball courts, and community centers. He sat where people gathered. He listened without a badge in hand, and they listened back, not because he wore a title, but because he carried truth. The media had tried to turn him into a headline. Black cop brings down corrupt department. But Ellis rejected that framing. "This isn't about one man fixing a broken system," he said in a CNN interview. "It's about giving voice to the people that system tried to silence. I didn't bring the truth to light. I just made room for it." In private, however, Ellis still carried scars. He thought about the years he stayed silent, the officers he watched rise through the ranks while pushing others down, the moments he almost walked away, not because he lacked strength, but because he had given too much of it. One evening, as he closed his office, Officer Wells knocked gently on the door. "You all right, Chief?" He nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." She smiled. "You did what most men wouldn't. You stayed long enough to change it from the inside." He gave a soft chuckle. "It's not over, Dana. We're just getting started." Outside the office, the precinct wall had been repainted, a mural now stretched across it, depicting community members, officers, and Ellis standing in unity, not in perfect harmony, but in committed rebuilding. A quote from Ellis was etched below the image. "Justice isn't the finish line, it's the foundation." And across the city, people started to believe again, not in systems or uniforms, but in people who dared to challenge what was broken. The corrupt officers who once smirked in that courtroom were now behind bars, disgraced, forgotten, shadows of the power they once misused. Meanwhile, Ellis walked forward, not with revenge in his heart, but with purpose in his step. Because for every boy stopped unfairly, every woman spoken down to, every good cop forced into silence, this victory wasn't symbolic, it was personal. And as Ellis stood before a new group of recruits weeks later, he said just one thing before handing them their badges. "If you're here to be feared, leave now. But if you're here to serve, protect, and own your mistakes, welcome to the future." Now, to the viewers of the Arc of Stories, What do you think justice looks like when the tables finally turn? And if you were in Chief Ellis's shoes, would you stay silent or would you rise knowing the cost? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the Arc of Stories, where truth has a voice.